cells can proliferate and they can grow. Okay, so it is an ordered series of events, and it is the sequence of events by which a cell duplicates its genome and eventually divides into two daughter cells. This is the main process during our growth, that how we grow. And the cell cycle, it has two main phases. One is the interphase, another is the mitosis phase, or we call it as M phase. So the period of actual division, the corresponding to visible mitosis, is called mitosis phase or the M phase. This is the phase where the cell division takes place, and during the interphase, the cell prepares itself to undergo cell division. So, by showing undergoing cell growth and DNA replication in an orderly manner. So the interphase is divided into three parts. One is G1 phase. The G1 is the gap1 phase, and it is the period between the end of the M phase and the start of the DNA replication. So DNA replication occurs in the S phase. It is also known as the synthesis phase, where the DNA replicates and double its genome. So after S phase comes the G2 phase. It is the gap2 phase. So during this, it is the gap period following the DNA replication and preceding the initiation of the M phase. There are some other cells as well that undergo the G node phase. So G node phase is the quiescent phase. So cells undergo the quiescent state, that is they are differentiated but they cannot divide longer. So the G node phase is the cells undergoing G node phase. They are basically they do not divide further, and they can divide if they receive the growth signal, but until and unless they don't receive any signal, they won't divide further. They are differentiated cells. So the interphase, this accounts for 90% of the cell cycle, and the duration of the three stages, these three stages of interphase, G1, S and G2 phase, they varies from species to species and also from cell to cell within a species. So although the length of all the phases of the cell cycle is variable to some extent, the greatest variation occurs in this G1 phase, and its length is adjusted in response to growth conditions. So in most cells, the whole M phase, it takes only about an hour. So suppose in general, a human cell takes 24 hours to divide. So the about only 1 hour is spent in mitosis, and rest of the time is spent in this interphase. So the time duration spent in the interphase is so long because cell wants to ensure that it can divide properly. Here in this phase, there are various processes that takes place that ensures that the cell is undergoing the controlled division. No So that proper cell division can take place. And I already explained you that the cells that undergo G node phase, it is called the resting state, and these cells can these are the differentiated cells, but when they receive the growth signals, they can divide. This example is like the liver cells. So what happens if liver gets regenerated? Even if half of the liver gets regenerated, the rest of the cells of the liver that are still alive, they can regenerate and form a complete liver. So this is how the cells in the G node stage, they can redivide again. Next is these are the processes of cell division. Main two processes, meiosis and mitosis. So meiosis, uh, it is meiosis is so first we'll talk about mitosis, then we will talk about meiosis. So mitosis is the process that it partitions the newly replicated chromosomes equally in two daughter cells, and during mitosis, one round of DNA replication is followed by the chromosome separation. So what happens in meiosis? We can see that actually there are four phases of meiosis: prophase, metaphase, anaphase and telophase, followed by cell division. So during prophase, what happens? Initially the DNA is present in the chromatin state. The DNA is in the chromatin state. So during prophase, the DNA condenses from chromatin state to the chromosomes. So it is the shape of the chromosome shown here. So During prophase, the chromatin take its shape as chromosome, and this chromosome gets aligned on the equatorial plate during the metaphase stage of the cell cycle. So as the chromosomes get aligned on the equatorial plate, these are the then during anaphase and telophase stage, the sister chromatids get separate. So I show you what are homologous chromosomes and what are sister chromatids. So this is how a chromosome looks like. These both strands, these are known as sister chromatid. So the both strands of a chromosome, they are known as sister chromatids. And if another chromosome, these are homologous chromosomes. So homologous chromosomes, these are the pair of chromosomes. One is inherited from the mother. Let's say this is inherited from mother and this is inherited from father. So during metaphase, these chromosomes get aligned on this equatorial plate. Once they align, during the anaphase, they get they are pulled towards the pole. So while they are pulled, the sister chromatids. So if we separate these chromosomes into their sister chromatids, this is how the sister chromatids will get separated. So these are the that two strands of the same chromosome. Okay, I hope you get it. So mitosis, we have seen that first the DNA during the S phase, the DNA content is doubled, and then this DNA content is divided into two daughter cells. It is equally divided into two daughter cells. So it is also known as equational division. You can see that here the chromosome number is 2n, and even here in daughter cells the chromosome number is also 2n. So this is the equational division. But during meiosis, what happens? Here the DNA replication is followed by two phases of two phases of chromosome separation. In first phase, during the metaphase, during the meiosis 1, so meiosis is mainly divided into two parts, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. So during meiosis 1, these what happens? These homologous chromosomes, that the one inherited from the mother, the other inherited from the father, they get paired. So once they get paired, they show recombination. So during recombination, they exchange their genetic material. Here you can see that how they are exchanging their genetic material, and this is the main reason that we all are different, we have variation in our genome. So that's why during this recombination, we even the siblings also differ, even the twins also differ many a times. So this is the main reason that how the variation comes and how individuals differ from one another. So after this recombination, the homologous chromosomes get separated, and once these homologous chromosomes get separated, they again undergo this chromatid separation. So then this after this chromatid separation, the daughter cell receive half of the chromosomes. So this is the reductional division. So here we have seen that the chromosome number was 2n, but after meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, the chromosome number get reduced to n. So the daughter cells have received half of the chromosomes. Here, so this meiosis 1 is the basically here the separation of homologous chromosomes takes place, and in meiosis 2 chromatids get separated. So meiosis 2 is also known as meiosis 1, since it is the so meiosis 1, it is meiosis 2 also known as meiosis 1 because it is same as meiosis 2 is also known as mitosis 1 mitosis because it is same as the mitosis. As we can see here, the chromatids are being separated, and in the same process is taking place here. So meiosis, it occurs in the somatic cells because somatic cells they don't somatic cells don't need to reduce their chromosome number. They are the exact copies of the parental cells, and meiosis occurs in the gamete cells. So chromosome number become half once they get replicated, they get divided. So daughter cell receive half of the chromosome number, and meiosis, it occurs in the gametes. So the meiosis occurs in the gametes because once the gamete are formed, they are haploid in number. So if the egg fuses with the sperm, so they restore that chromosome number. Otherwise, if the gametes are 2n, already they are diploid, and if a diploid cell is fused with a diploid cell, the male gamete is fused with the female gamete, and if they are diploid already, then it will lead to a polyploid condition. So it will be a it like it is not that how the cell works. So the next question comes, so do molecular signal in the cytoplasm regulate the cell cycle? Here, as it is already told that there are certain proteins and certain processes takes place during different phases of the cell cycle, which regulates the cell division. So here it is shown that if the cells from different phases of cell cycle fuses together, so what is the outcome? So in experiment 1, it is shown that if a cell is present in the S phase, that is the synthesis phase where the DNA replication is going on, and if it is fused with the G1 phase, the phase where the DNA is preparing itself to undergo the cell division, what happens? What will be the outcome? So here, so if both the cells are fused, we can see that both the cells are undergoing S phase. So the cell that was in G1 phase, it gets into the S phase if it is fused with the S phase cell, the cells under the S phase. So when a cell in S phase is fused with the G1, the G1 nucleus immediately entered the S phase and DNA is synthesized. And in experiment 2, here what happens if a cell that is already present in the M phase. So it means the cell is already undergoing the chromosomal division, and if it is fused with the cell in the G1 phase, the cell preparing to undergo to undergo DNA replication, what happens? So we can see that both the cells, so the means the cell was that was present in the G1 phase, it has also become in the M phase. So the proteins or the molecules that regulate the M phase that are present in the cell, they are also showing its function in the cell that was present in the G1 phase and allow this cell to enter the M phase. So the conclusion is that the result of using a G1 cell with a cell in the S or M phase of the cell cycle, it suggests that the molecules present in the cytoplasm during this S phase and M phase, they control the progression to those phases. Next comes the cell cycle control system. So as I have already told you that the cell spends a lot of time during the interphase, and the time is longer because the cell needs to ensure that the cell cycle is going properly without any mistake. Otherwise it will cause a lot of mutation in our cell, and the mutated cell may lead to various consequences, like it may form the cancerous cells or it may lead to other disease conditions. So there are various cell cycle checkpoints that ensures at every stage that the cell is undergoing proper cell division. So the cells in the G1 checkpoint, they checks for the cell size, that the cell size is proper. If they sense that the cell size is not proper, they won't allow that cell to undergo further cell division. They allow to cell to repair that process that undergone neglected. Another is the growth factors, that specific growth factors are present for cell to undergo next phase of cell cycle and DNA damage. So no DNA damage should be there. If the DNA is damaged, the cell will arrest at the G1 checkpoint. Then again the G2 checkpoints, it again checks for the cell cycle and DNA replication. As we know that the G2 phase is preceded by the S phase. So in S phase DNA replication takes place. So if DNA replication has not taken place properly, the cell will arrest at the G2 phase and it won't allow the cell to undergo the M phase. Because the um, if somehow the misreplicated DNA is allowed to undergo the cell division, it will cause a lot of drastic consequences in the cell. So that's why G2 checkpoint is present, and M checkpoint checks for the chromosome attachment to the spindle. So we have seen that the M stands for the mitosis phase, and during mitosis chromatids and chromosomes get separated. So when the chromatids are separated, they need to be aligned properly, and they should be separated in a proper manner. Otherwise, if a cell receives more number of chromatids and a cell receives less number of chromatid, it will cause aneuploidy condition, and this aneuploidy condition again will lead to various disease conditions. So the cell cycle control system ensures that a cell should undergo proper cell division. So what happens if cell cycle loses its checkpoint?
Sorry to just interrupt you, but
Yeah.
someone asked a very basic question. I think we should answer this before we proceed forward.
Okay.
So, someone asked that if cell cycle is of 24 hours, then mitosis takes 1 hour and meiosis is two-phase process. So, does it take 2 hours for overall meiosis to happen?
Actually, it does not take properly 2 hours. It takes little longer time than mitosis, because what happens in mitosis, the DNA replication is followed by one round of chromosomal separation, and in meiosis, the DNA replication is followed by two round of separation without any other DNA replication. So yes, it does take more longer time than mitosis, but it don't take exactly 2 hours. Some so the mitosis length is longer than meiosis length is longer than mitosis, it is for sure, but the exact time is not known. Like I am not aware of the exact time. I'll let you know. Okay, so is the student clear with the doubt?
Vaibhav, you can say whether it's correct or like have you understood it or not? Yeah, he has understood.
So what happens if a cell if cell loses all its control cell cycle checkpoints? So if cell cycle checkpoints are not working properly, the cell will undergo mutation, and this mutation will these mutations will cause the cell to undergo uncontrollable cell division. The cell division won't be controlled. Cell will divide at higher proliferation rate than at the normal cell, so cell will divide infinitely. So what happens when this cell divide infinitely, it forms a tumor. So a tumor will grow from a single cancer cell, and these cancer cells invade the neighboring tissues. So and the cancer cells can also spread through the other parts of the body, and so they can spread through the lymph node and blood vessels. So once they move to the other parts, these cells undergo metastasis. So metastasis is the process where the when cancer is localized to a particular region, it moves to the another region as well, and it forms a niche where it can proliferate, and so this is how the cancer spreads in the body. So there are two types of tumor basically. Benign tumor, these are the abnormal cells that remain at its original site, but they don't get spread to other sites. But it actually depends on the stage of the cancer. So initially all the cancers are at its benign stage, so they don't get spread. So once they get they receive, they are showing high proliferation rate, and they have created a niche that allow them to undergo metastasis. They becomes malignant, and these include the cells that spread to new tissues and impair the functions of one or more organ. So if a cell loses its cell cycle checkpoints, it will be a drastic condition for cells. So the question comes, if a cell with a diploid number of 16, it undergoes meiosis, how many chromosomes are there in each daughter cell at the end of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2? So here we can see, so can anybody answer this question, that if a diploid cell with 16 number of chromosomes undergoes meiosis, how many chromosomes will be present in each daughter cell? First at the end of meiosis 1. Can anybody volunteer?
Is it
8
eight?
and 8.
Yes, it is 8 and 8. Okay, nice. So the next question comes, that if a cell having 48 chromosome and it undergoes mitotic division, so what will be the chromosome number and DNA content during these 5 phases of cell cycle? So what should be the DNA chromosome number and DNA content during the interphase? Like what will be the chromosome number during this interphase?
D- DNA content means
24.
DNA content means that when a cell is present in normal cells, the DNA content is called as 2C. When a cell divides, the DNA content doubles. So when a cell undergoes S phase, the DNA content doubles and it becomes 4C. So the DNA content becomes double, 2C to 4C. So in interphase, what should be the DNA content here? It should be 2C or 4C. Like I have already explained you that the interphase is comprised of three phases. Sorry? Yeah, say again.
2C, 2C
Uh, tell me first of
during
all
S phase.
tell me first of all that in interphase whether the DNA is replicated or not.
During the S phase, it is replicated.
So S phase comes in the interphase or not?
It comes in interphase.
So what should the DNA content?
So it is 4C.
Yes, exactly. It is 4C. And the chromosome number is 2 during all these divisions. And the DNA content during this interphase is 4C. And the DNA content will remain same until and unless the cell will divide. So as the cell will divide, what will be the DNA content here in the telophase?
2C.
Yes, it will be 2C. And what about the chromosome number?
Chromosome number 2.
Hope you all get this. So next is the how many chromatids does a diploid body cell contain just prior to cell division? So how many chromatids are present in this? What will be the chromatid number in this diploid cell? This is a human cell. So yeah. Yes. Anybody?
46.
Yes, 46 chromatids. And what will be the chromatid here once the cell is divided?
23.
Are you sure?
No, chromatids will be 46.
Yes, and the chromosome will be
23.
23 pairs of chromosome because it is a mitosis, it is a equational division, so the chromosome number will remain same. And if it would be meiosis, the chromosome number will reduce to half because that's in reductional division. Okay. So the next question comes, what do you infer from the statement that meiosis enables the conservation of the specific chromosome number of each species, even though the process actually results in the reduction of chromosome number? So what is the conclusion that you can deduce from this statement? So how meiosis enables the conservation of specific chromosome number? We see that meiosis is a reductional division. When the haploid when it forms a gamete, the haploid cell receives half of the chromosome, right? But then how the cell restores its chromosome number?
When the egg fuses with the sperm, the original chromosome, that is the haploid number, is maintained. Like
Yes.
N and N.
Yes, N becomes 2N. So this is how the meiosis restores the diploidy. So I hope you understand that how important it is for the gametes to undergo meiosis. So is there a certain times of mitosis that can happen to a cell or its offspring? So uh, it is defined that a cell will undergo this much number of cell divisions?
No.
No,
Okay.
Not specific.
actually it depends on the signal, how much he receives to grow. He cannot grow in excess.
So can a normal cell divide any number of times?
No, not actually. It should
So
stop
is there
at
any
somewhere.
limit to that cell division that okay, this is the number of times that a normal cell will divide?
Yeah, there should be a limit.
Yeah, there is a limit that is called as Hayflick limit, and that limit is due to because of the telomeres that are present at the end of these chromosomes. So what happens during cell division? So these telomeres they are replicated with the help of an enzyme that is telomerase, and this telomerase performs reverse transcription that helps in the replication of these telomeres. So this telomerase enzyme, it is absent in the normal cells. So once the cell starts to divide, it continues to divide. So this due to the absence of that telomerase enzyme, the telomeres get shortened, and once the telomeres get shortened, the chromosome will also reduce its length, and so eventually the cell will stop its cell division. So that's how the cell division is limited. The next question comes: how do stem cells maintain their own population and generate differentiated cells? Like we say that stem cells have the ability that they are like they can divide, they can maintain their own population, and then they can also produce the differentiated cells. Any guesses? So how does a stem cell replicate? So the stem cell divide into a stem cell and a precursor cell. So it undergoes two. It mainly divides into two type of cells. So once when it get divided into the stem cell, so this is how it maintain its own population. And when it divides into the precursor cell, it forms a differentiated cell. So this precursor cell can differentiate into several cell types depending on the external factors. So it can differentiate into the fat cell, bone cells, or white blood cells, depending on the growth signaling factors that it receives. So next is the nucleus from a differentiated animal cell direct the development of an organism. Actually, you received the answer. So here it is shown that it is a frog egg cell in which the nucleus is irradiated, so it becomes an enucleated egg cell. Now this enucleated egg cell, this is taken, and the nucleus from a less differentiated cell is injected in this enucleated cell. And so when the nucleus from less differentiated cell is injected in this enucleated cell, this cell can form the complete tadpole. And when a fully differentiated cell is taken from a frog tadpole, its nucleus is injected into this enucleated cell. It can form it can progress to the cell division, that is the blastomere and gastrula, but it stops developing before the tadpole stage. So this shows that the cell that is already differentiated, it has very limited possibility that it can form the complete organism, because its fate is already decided in this frog tadpole. So it can no longer form the complete tadpole. But here, where the fate of that embryo is of that nucleus is not already divided, based on the signaling factors that are present in this enucleated cell cytoplasm, they decide the fate of this nucleus, and accordingly this nucleus will undergo the cell division and it can form the complete tadpole. So the nucleus from a differentiated frog cell can direct the development of a tadpole. However, its ability to do so decreases because the donor cell, it is more differentiated, and it is presumably because of the changes in the nucleus that has already occurred in this differentiated cell. I hope everybody gets this point. If there is any doubt, please let me know. You can unmute and ask your queries. Okay, we'll have the discussion session in the last, so you can ask your queries there as well. So next is the DNA tools. Yes, anybody? Okay, so we are moving forward. Next is the DNA tools, recombinant DNA technology. Here we will read about these three topics, mainly these recombinant DNA technology and polymerase chain reaction primary. So a question comes, what is chromatid? Okay, so I show you what is chromatid. So there is a difference between a DNA. This is the DNA that is present, and then when this DNA, they are coiled over these histone, they are histone proteins. This DNA is wrapped over these histone proteins and it gets coiled. So this is how a chromatid is made. So
Diksha, are you sharing your screen? Because I had actually started sharing my screen before you started answering the question.
actually I was showing the diagrammatic representation how a chromatid and chromatin looks.
Your screen was not coming. Can you just share it again?
Oh, okay. I don't know what is that. Yes, chromatid. This is a chromosome, and before chromosome, the DNA is present in the chromatid stage. It is the DNA that is wrapped over histone proteins. These are the histone proteins. So this chromatid gets more condensed and it forms a chromosome. So chromatin is the less condensed form of the DNA, and chromosome is the more condensed form of the DNA. So it is, the difference comes in the shape. So the chromatids are like this shape, and the chromosomes are of this shape, and the chromatids, they don't have any shape. They are just they are coiled in such a manner that they acquire, they occupy less space in the nucleus. This is the main difference between the chromatid and the chromosome. Is it clear or not?
Yeah, yes.
So, Shitrupa, you can continue as you can start presenting.
Okay. Okay, I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the next part of the tutorial is about the DNA tools. Recombinant DNA technology, PCR, and primer design. So what is recombinant DNA technology? Recombinant DNA technology is a technology that uses different enzymes to cut and paste together the DNA sequences. So what happens is that suppose we want to insert a particular gene of interest into a bacteria, and we want to amplify that gene and to get the gene product. So first we have this cell which is going to donate the gene of interest. We call this cell as a donor, and using certain enzymes we isolate that gene from the DNA of this donor cell. Now we want to insert this gene into a suitable vector which is going to multiply and give multiple copies of this gene. So this vector we also call it as the plasmid donor. Now, in the previous lecture, like we had said that we had discussed the structure of a bacterial cell. So, in the nucleus of the bacteria, like bacteria, in addition to its normal genetic material, it also has certain other circular DNA structures which are called as the plasmids. Now, these plasmids, we use them for our different genetic engineering purposes. So this plasmid is like this circular structure. We use different enzymes to cut the plasmids in different positions. So by using the enzymes, we make a cut in this plasmid, and again with a different set of enzymes, we insert the gene of interest into this plasmid to get this kind of a structure. Now this recombinant plasmid, like it contains both the bacterial DNA in this black portion here, as well as our gene of interest, which is the white portion. Now this recombinant plasmid, it is inserted into a third cell, which is going to replicate multiple times. So this third cell on replication, it generates multiple copies of our gene of interest. Now on replication of this gene of interest, multiple copies are formed, and after replication, the processes of transcription and translation take place, and ultimately we are getting a huge amount of protein from our gene of interest. So what is a plasmid? Like I already said that bacteria, like what is a plasmid? So bacteria carry accessory DNA molecules in addition to their normal genetic material, and these are called as the plasmids. So this is a general structure of how a plasmid looks like. Like different plasmids have different names. Like here we have given the diagram of the plasmid, which is named as PUC19. So a plasmid, it usually has one site which codes for antibiotic resistance, and here this part is in violet color. This is the gene coding for ampicillin resistance. It also has certain genes which code for different enzymes which the bacteria uses for fermentation of its own food. Like here the genes are given in green color. These are the LAC-Z gene and the LAC-I gene. They secrete these code for enzymes which help the bacteria to metabolize lactose. And for the function of these LAC genes, the bacteria has this black thing called a promoter. And for the entire replication of this plasmid, the bacteria has this sequence which is known as the origin of replication. Now inside the LAC-Z gene, you can see that there are two sites here which are given in red color. One is EcoR1 and one is HIN3. Now what is EcoR1 and HIN3? EcoR1 and HIN3 are called as restriction enzymes. Now restriction enzymes are enzymes which cut the DNA at specific sequences. So suppose we are applying EcoR1 to this plasmid vector. So EcoR1 will cut the DNA at this position, and then the plasmid, it will just open up and form a straight linear structure. And then we can insert a different gene in that position, in the cut position, so that the ends of the plasmid can again join again and again form that circular structure which we saw in the previous slide. So why does a plasmid need this ampicillin resistance gene in it, or suppose a lactose fermenting gene? So we need to know that whether our gene of interest has been properly inserted into the plasmid or not. So for that, like after we have cut the plasmid, inserted our gene, we again put the plasmid into certain mediums containing ampicillin or containing lactose. So since we are making the cut in the lactose encoding gene, we have inserted our gene of interest, suppose in this green region. That means this LAC-Z gene is no longer functioning, which means that this plasmid is no longer capable of producing the enzyme which is going to digest lactose. So if we put this plasmid in a lactose containing medium, it's not going to be able to ferment the lactose. So that's how we understand that yes, our gene of interest has been properly inserted. So similarly, if we make a cut in this ampicillin resistance gene right here to insert our gene of interest, this plasmid will lose its ability to resist the antibiotic ampicillin. So if we put it in an ampicillin containing medium, ampicillin is going to destroy that plasmid. So these different antibiotic resistance genes and genes like the LAC, they're used to understand whether our gene of interest has been properly inserted or not. So what are restriction enzymes? Like I said, there's certain enzymes, they're used to cut the plasmid at different positions, and certain enzymes are also used to ensure that our target gene is getting attached with the plasmid at the cut sites. So these enzymes, they are called as the restriction enzymes. The restriction enzymes recognize specific sites on the DNA duplex and cuts them to produce single-stranded free ends called the sticky ends. And then these sticky ends, they join with another pair of sticky ends and join with another pair of the sticky ends. And this joining is carried out by the help of the enzyme called the ligase. So this is what a sticky end looks like. Like this is our normal double helix DNA structure. We are making a cut here, suppose with the help of the restriction enzymes. Like the restriction enzymes here are represented with the picture of a scissor. We are making cuts here and here, here and here. So after cutting, like you can just imagine like what will happen if we make a cut here. So if we make a cut here, this top portion, this top half of the DNA is going to be gone. So only the bottom part is going to remain. Similarly, if we make a cut here, suppose with this scissor here, then this entire bottom half will be gone, the top part will be there. So this is what the DNA is going to look like after we apply the restriction enzymes. So here the bottom part is intact, here the top part is intact. So this cutting and the restriction enzymes, they are such that the bottom part which is here, like the bases which are here, they are complementary to the bases which are going to be here. So that's why, like because of the complementarity of these bases, these will naturally go and join with these. Like when we apply the ligase enzymes, the complementary bases, they will attach together and we will get a brand new DNA double helix. And this new double helix which you are getting in this process, this is called as the recombinant DNA. So here you can see like when we use the restriction enzymes, two kinds of ends are created. Like here, like when we have one half of the DNA hanging like this and one half is gone. This is called the sticky ends. So here, like the restriction enzymes HIN3 and EcoR1, they make cuts at specific positions like this. and they generate the overhanging structures like the one given in the figure, and these are called as the sticky ends. BAM-H1, it also generates sticky ends. But here from the certain other restriction enzymes such as AIU1 and HAE3, they make cuts in such a way that there are no overhanging strands. Like you can see, like they're making cuts at exactly the same position as in the bottom as well as the top strands. So there is no overhanging parts, and these are known as the blunt ends. So this is an example of recombinant DNA technology. This is widely used for production of the recombinant human insulin. So here we have our plasmid. We have our plasmid. So the plasmid, it has a promoter region which is going to help in the replication of the plasmid as a whole. The antibiotic resistance gene, a beta galactosidase gene, which is like similar to the LAC gene which I talked about. It encodes for a certain enzyme which helps in bacteria of fermentation of sugar. And here we have inserted the insulin gene. Now the insulin, it is a total of two subunits, the A subunit and the B subunit. Now for production of the human insulin, we need to synthesize the A subunit and the B subunit separately. So here we have, in this plasmid, we have inserted the gene for the insulin A subunit, and in this plasmid we have inserted the gene for the insulin B subunit. So after making this recombinant plasmid, we are inserting it into a bacteria which is going to replicate and generate multiple copies of these insulin A and insulin B genes. So here we can see in the figure, after replicating, it has also produced the insulin A protein and the insulin B protein. So then we are lysing the cells, we are breaking open the cell membrane, and we are purifying the proteins which the cell has produced. We are getting a purified insulin A protein and a purified insulin B protein. And okay, then we are joining insulin A protein and the insulin B protein. Now this, at the ends of these insulin A, recombinant insulin A and insulin B proteins, a certain extra part is there, which is this beta galactosidase gene portion is there, the extra part. So we want to just get rid of that. So we use a certain restriction enzyme which is going to cleave off this extra part which we don't want. And then we join together this insulin A and insulin B strands with the help of disulfide bridges to get the complete human insulin. So in this way, we generate the human insulin using a bacterial plasmid vector. So what is agarose gel electrophoresis? Like agarose gel electrophoresis is used to confirm whether our plasmid DNA is getting properly digested or not. Like when we are cutting it with the restriction enzymes, like I said, that one way to check is to place the plasmid in an antibiotic containing medium or a lactose containing medium to see whether it's encoding like the antibiotic resistance gene or the lactose gene. Like that is one way to check whether we are inserting our DNA of interest properly or not. And another way to do the exact same thing is with the help of the agarose gel electrophoresis. So first we are loading the DNA sample, which is our recombinant plasmid. Like before cloning and after cloning also we are going to do this. So suppose before cloning, like before we are doing anything to the native plasmid, we just load it, we run it through the agarose gel electrophoresis, and then we get certain bands like this. Like this bands, this is characteristic for a particular plasmid. So suppose this is the plasmid, like this is the bands for the native plasmid, like before we do anything to it. So now we have applied certain restriction enzymes to the plasmid. We have cut it open. We have inserted our gene of interest, and we want to check whether it has properly inserted or not. So again, we load that recombinant plasmid. We run it through the agarose gel electrophoresis, and we get another like DNA fragments like this. So we compare the two DNA fragments side by side, like one with the native, like the DNA fragment image of the previous, like the native plasmid with the new recombinant plasmid, and we check for the differences. So if the differences are matching with what we are expecting it to be, like in case of like where we are making the cuts, how much smaller or larger the plasmid is going to become, if it's matching, then we can understand that yes, our recombination has properly taken place. Otherwise, if there is any deviation from this, we can easily understand exactly where the deviation has taken place. Okay, so this is a question. So like, okay, so yeah, this is a plasmid. Like it has different sites demarcated as X and Y and Z, where different restriction enzymes are going to make a cut and the respective base pair lengths between each of these different segments. So the question is that, like, you have been given this agarose gel electrophoresis picture, like this is the picture which you are going to get after gel electrophoresis, after single digest and double digest, and you are going to have to construct this image. Like, this is the answer of the question actually, like you have to going to construct this image from this image which is actually part of the question. So how are you going to go about this? So this is actually a very tricky and difficult question. So I'm going to go about it very slowly, part by part. So the entire length of the plasmid, this entire length, like if you count one by one, like 115 plus 425 plus 60 plus 10 plus 20 plus 110 plus 260. This comes out to be 1000 exactly. Okay, so this 1000, this is coinciding with the length of the Z fragment. So this is coinciding the length of the Z fragment. So if you correlate with this plasmid image, you will see that if we make a cut at this Z, at this Z position, like it will generate only one entire like straight plasmid. So this will be of length 1000. So this is correlating with this. Okay, the next fragment which is coming in this gel electrophoresis is X, which is of 910 base pairs. So if you see here, like X means we are making one cut here and one cut here. So if you count the number of bases between these two, like 110 plus 260 plus 115 plus 425, you will see that it comes to 910. And the next fragment which you are getting is Y, which is 860. Now Y means one cut is being made here, another cut is being made here. So that means the number of bases will be 60 plus 425 plus 115 plus 260, which is coming to 860. The next fragment is X plus Y, which is of 800 base pairs. So if you X plus Y means there is one cut which is being made here, another cut is being made here. So if you count the number of count the number of bases, which is 110 plus 260 plus 115 plus 425 plus 60, it's coming to be 800 only. So the next fragment is Y plus Z, which is 600 bases. So if you just count, like Y plus Z means like you're making like one cut here, another cut here. Like if you count it up, it will come to 600. So in this way, you have to move sequentially according to the fragments which are given, the number of bases, and accordingly you have to start drawing the thing one by one. And you place the number of bases like as per what is given there in the question. Like I know this is very tricky and time consuming, but like you have to go one by one starting from the top. Okay. So has everybody understood this slide? Then I'll move forward. If you have any questions about this slide, just ask it now.
Excuse me. Yes, go ahead.
So somebody had unmuted herself and was going to ask something.
I didn't get that which y we have to do, like in x plus y. So which x and which y we have to do?
Okay, so which x and which y? Okay, so like when you're going to solve this problem on your own, like you're not going to get this, like you have to make this image yourself. So just by looking at this, like you're not going to understand that there are two x's in this figure and there are two y's or there is one z. So accordingly, when you're putting the marks, you have to check whether it's actually tallying with this or not. If you have put, suppose one x and one y and it's not tallying, that means you have to put another x or another y to make the base pairs match. So in that way, you have to, generate this entire thing. So which x and which y, like right now, I also have to calculate it. I also have to calculate it manually.
Can you please do an example by doing Andy?
An exam, Diksha, can you like repeat what he said?
He's saying to do an example, like to show how to calculate this.
Okay. So I'm just making a much more simplified one. So suppose this is your agarose gel fragment. You have one big fragment which is called suppose A, and you have one fragment which is suppose B, a smaller fragment, and another fragment, smaller fragment, which is C. So suppose A is of 100 base pairs. This is going to be a perfect circle. Okay, I'm sorry for the drawing. It's becoming very bad. So suppose immediately just by looking at this, just first identify the biggest fragment which is there. You make a circle and you make a mark here, which is going to be A. So A is the biggest fragment, which means that the entire length of the plasmid, this is of 100 base pairs. Okay. Okay, now then this B fragment, suppose it's of, suppose it's 75 base pairs. Now you just hypothetically place this B cut somewhere here, in this way. Suppose this is B. Okay, now this means that this part, from here to here, this is going to be 75. Which means the smaller part from here to here. This is going to be 25. Okay, which means C is automatically is going to be 25. Diksha, can you just confirm whether I did this right or not?
Yeah, actually, so once we'll cut this band with the A restriction enzyme, we will get a band of 100 base pair, and another time if we will cut it with B, we'll get a band of if we cut it with both A and B, we'll get two band, one of 75 base pair and another is of 25 base pair. So this in line in the second lane that you have written B, here we will digest the plasmid with two enzymes A plus B. So here we'll get two bands, one of 75 base pair and another is of 25 base pairs.
Okay, so this is going to be A plus B.
Yeah, it is going to be A plus B.
So this C thing, this part is this part is C, this thing.
Yeah, this
that
can
this,
be C.
This C is going to happen when we digest it with A plus C, right?
B plus C, yeah.
B plus C or A plus C?
Yeah, you can digest it with A plus C as well.
Okay. Okay, so have I answered everybody's question? I know this is a very tricky thing. So just begin with the largest base pair thing, the largest one is going to be the length of the entire plasmid, and then work sequentially down from that, go from the largest to the smallest. So in that way you can generate this thing.
Yes, just ensure that the base pair matches with the restriction fragment that you have obtained.
So have I answered your doubt?
Actually, I had a doubt.
Yes.
That I don't think that C should be there because the A plus B will cut the fragment into two pieces, like 75 plus 25. So
Yes.
25 should be in the column of A plus B, right?
Yeah, we have shown the possibility that if C will be there, the 25 will be divided in another in one. Let's say A plus C fragment will be of 10 base pair and this will be of 15 base pair. So if we digest this plasmid with 3 enzymes, A plus B plus C, then we will get 4 bands. One of 75 base pair, another we'll get 3 bands, one of 75 base pair, another of 10 base pair, then next is of 15 base pair. So we
Okay,
have
okay,
just shown the
got it.
possibility.
Thank you.
Yeah. Shatruba, we can move ahead.
Okay, so we were done till here. So this is another question. So a plasmid of 5 plasmid of 5 kb size, like with the entire length of the plasmid is 5 kb. Okay, it has size for 3 restriction enzymes, HIN3, ECO-R1 and NCO1. What will be the pattern of DNA bands look like on agarose gel when digested with HIN3 and ECO-R1, HIN3 and NCO1? So when we are digesting with HIN3, it's going to make cuts at these places which are marked as HIN3. And when we are cutting with ECO-R1, like only one cut is going to be made. And we are cutting with NCO1, also only one cut is going to be made. So here we can see that when we are cutting with HIN3 and ECO-R1, like when we are cutting with HIN3, like we are making 2 cuts here. So there is going to be one fragment of 0.5 kb. We are getting it here, 0.5 kb. And another bigger fragment, like from this HIN3 to this HIN3, this entire part, which is like this, like after cutting with HIN3, like we are getting this smaller fragment of 0.5 and this larger fragment. Now this larger fragment is again being cut by ECO-R1. So this larger fragment is again being subdivided into 2 smaller fragments. So these 2 smaller fragments, these are going to be of 2.5 kb plus 0.5 kb, which is 3 kb, which we are getting a band here. And this band from this ECO-R1 to HIN3, this is going to be another band, which is of 1.5 kb, which you are getting it here. So in the second part of the question, we are digesting with HIN3 and NCO1. So again, similarly, we are cutting it here and here. So we are getting this smaller band of 0.5 kb, which is appearing here in the gel, and a larger band, which is spanning from here to here. Now this larger band is again being digested by NCO1 into 2 smaller bands. So the sizes of the 2 smaller bands will be one from here to here, which is of 2.5 kb, which is coming here in the gel, and another band which is from here to here, which is of 1.5 plus 0.5, which is 2 kb, which is coming up here in the gel. So I think this was a much more simpler example than the previous one. So you can use this slide as, you know, to learn better about like how these enzymes are cutting and the length of the fragments, and then you can move to the previous slide which I showed. So this is another question. In an experimental setup for generating recombinant plasmid molecule with a gene for human growth hormone, both the vector and gene of interest, the gene of interest, which is the growth hormone, were digested with 2 restriction enzymes, BAMH1 and HIN3. So these are the images which are given, like this is the HIN3 restriction site. So HIN3 restriction site means that this enzyme is going to cut between 2 adjacent adenosine residues. And BAMH1 restriction site means this enzyme is going to cut in between 2 adjacent guanosine residues. So the question is, show diagrammatically how the vector and the gene will join together upon addition of the ligase enzyme. So for proceeding with this kind of questions, first you like write down what's going to happen when you're cutting between these 2 A's and when you're cutting between these 2 G's, and what the overhang is going to look like. So after cutting it, like this is what you're getting. Like when you're cutting the top strand, the lower strand is like hanging off like this for the HIN3, and for BAMH1, when you're cutting that bottom strand, the upper strand is hanging off like this. So again, you're joining these 2 together, like they're on the basis of complementarity. So when you're joining on the basis of complementarity, like you can see like the overhangs here and the overhangs here, they are complementary to each other. So they will join together with the help of ligase to form the final product, which is this. So I hope everybody has understood this part. Like, are there any doubts? Okay, so then I'm moving ahead. So what is PCR? So PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. So PCR is a process by which we are making multiple, like millions of copies of our like gene of interest in an in vitro process. Like we are not inserting our gene of interest into any bacteria. Rather, we are multiplying it with the help of a machine which we are calling the PCR machine. Now this technique, it was discovered by Carey Millis in 1984. So in PCR, what happens is that the PCR components are the DNA which we want to amplify, then certain small stretches of DNA which are the primers. We are adding externally the nucleotides with the nucleotide bases which are A, C, G, and T. We are adding our enzyme which is going for the DNA replication, which is called Taq polymerase. We also need a buffer, and we need a PCR tube for mixing all of these things together. And we are inserting all of this into the PCR machine, which is called the thermal cycler. So in the PCR cycle, like this is the double-stranded DNA which we have originally. Now we are going to denature it, which means we are going to separate the individual strands by subjecting it to high temperature. So after subjecting it to high temperature, the strands, they are going to separate to form single strands. Now after separation into the single strands, we are going to add the primers. Now primers, these are the short DNA sequences whose sequence is complementary to the sequence of the original DNA. Okay, suppose we want to suppose this DNA is the gene of interest which we want to multiply, and we are adding the primer, which is the short DNA sequence whose sequence is complementary to our gene of interest in a small part. Okay, so the primer, it has annealed to this short part of our gene of interest. And then the final step is extension. So using the enzyme Taq polymerase, the Taq polymerase is going to add the nucleotides to this primer here, and it's going to move forward in this direction and this direction. And then we are getting two brand new strands of the DNA. So in each cycle of the PCR, you can see that the number of DNA is going to double. So like I said, the primers, these are the short oligonucleotide sequences, and they have their sequence which is the complement of the region of that our target DNA or the template. And these are going to, and these primers, they anneal to our DNA of interest. So this is what I just said, and here is given diagrammatically. So our template is the DNA, suppose the template is our DNA of interest which we want to multiply, and this primer, like you can see that the DNA sequence of this is complementary to our gene of interest. So because it's complementary, it's going to bind to it like this, and this process of binding is called the annealing. So after annealing, like when we are going to add Taq polymerase to it, the Taq polymerase is going to use this short primer sequence as its origin of replication. So it's going to start replicating from here, and it's going to add bases sequentially starting from here. And then we are going to get a brand new DNA fragment, which is identical to our original DNA. So for carrying out this PCR, we have to know two important temperatures, which is the primer melting temperature or the TM and the annealing temperature. So we calculate the TM or the primer melting temperature as 2 into number of total of bases of A and bases of T plus 4 into number of bases of G and bases of C. So this is going to give you the primer melting temperature. So after we get to know the primer melting temperature, we can calculate the annealing temperature from this, which is 5 minus the melting temperature of the primer. So this is a short question, like this is the sequence of the primer. We have to calculate the TM and the annealing temperature. So the total number of A and T here is 12, and the total number of G and C here is 10. So the TM is going to be 2 into 12 plus 10 into 4, which comes out to be 64 degrees Celsius. And then the annealing temperature is going to be 64 minus 5, which is 59 degrees Celsius. So primer designing. Okay, so this is another question, like design primers that will amplify the following region of DNA. So assume that this is one strand from a double-stranded region of DNA. The primer should be 15 bases in length. Indicate the 5' and 3' ends of the primer. Okay, so in the question they have given you one single strand of DNA which is oriented in this way, like from 5' to 3'. Now before going forward with this question, like I'll just want to remind you that when DNA replication takes place, the orientation is always from the 5' end to the 3' end. Okay, and while writing a sequence of DNA, like the default orientation is also from the 5' to the 3' end. So for primer, like this, they have given you one strand. So the opposite strand of the DNA, like it's going to have a base sequence which is complementary to this. So first you write down, like you suppose you name this one as strand 1. You write it down just as it is, like from 5' to 3', write it down this in the exact same way which is given in the question. And then you make another strand 2, which is the complementary strand. You write down the complementary bases of the strand which is given in the question, and you just flip the orientation. Like if this is your 5' to 3', the complementary strand is going to be from 3' to 5'. So first you generate the original strands of your DNA. So this is the 5' to 3' strand. This is the 3' to 5' strand. Then you start making the primers. So they want primers of 15 base length. So since I already said that the DNA replication, it takes place from the 5' to 3' direction, you have to make the primers in that way only. So in this strand, like 5, this end is 5', this end is 3', which means that for DNA replication to take place, like your primer has to be on this side. So it has to be like the complementary, like 3'. This part is going to be 5' of the primer, and this part is going to be 3' of the primer. So you have to make the primer on this end so that the DNA replication takes place from this end to this end, so that you can get a double-stranded DNA here. So this is going to be one primer. Like if the sequence is complementary, but the sequence is complementary to your strand 1, and the orientation in this way is 3' to 5'. And this is your strand 2, which originally is from 3' to 5' orientation, written like this. You just write the complementary here, and since this end of the template is 3', this end of your primer is going to be 5', and this end is going to be 3'. And in this way, the DNA replication is going to take place. So accordingly, now you got 2 primers in this way, each of 15 base pairs length. So the forward primer is the one which is originally 5' to 3'. So the one which is originally 5' to 3' is this one, like the primer which you are getting from the strand 2. Like from the beginning only, you are writing it from the 5' to 3' orientation. So this one is your forward primer. And the reverse primer is the one which, when you're writing it down, like originally it's in the 3' to 5' orientation. So this one is the reverse primer. So when in the answer, when you're going to write what is the reverse primer, you have to flip the orientation of it, because while writing any DNA sequence, we have to write it from the 5' to 3' orientation. So this thing is written in this way only, just the orientation of it is flipped. So here it is written 3' GGCAT, something like this, and from the 5' end is CCCT. So when you're writing it down like this, it's the exact same thing, 5' TCCT, and on the 3' end you have the CGG. It's the exact same thing, just flipped. So has everybody understood this part very nicely? Like if there are any questions, please ask it now.
What does 5' and 3' means?
That's just the way of, we are representing the direction of the DNA. So 5' means like in the deoxyribose sugar, like on one end we have the phosphate group, and on the one end, like we have the oxygen with which the next DNA base is going to on the 5' end we have the nitrogenous base, and on the other hand we have the phosphate group. So in that, accordingly, in that way we are naming it as 5' and 3'. So Diksha, can you just tell me like which one exactly is 5' and which one is 3'? Like is the nitrogenous base is 5' and the phosphate group is 3', am I right?
Actually, the phosphate group is on the 5' end.
Okay.
And then the deoxyribose sugar is on the 3' base, and the nitrogenous base is it is in the core of the strand. So the phosphate and the ribose sugar forms the backbone of the DNA strand.
Okay, no, so like how is it 5' and 3' coming? So at the 5' part we have the phosphate group.
Phosphate is present, and the 3' OH group of the ribose sugar is present.
Okay. Okay, so that's the answer is your question. So on the 5' end means that part the free phosphate group is there, and on the 3' end means that part the OH group of the deoxyribose sugar is there. So
yes, polymerization
takes place.
Yeah, one more point. And polymerization takes place from 5' to 3' end, because at 3' end OH group is present, and this OH group act as a nucleophile and attack on the 5' phosphate of other nucleotide.
Okay, so any other questions with this slide? Okay, then I'm moving forward. Okay, so what's the PCR, like application of PCR in practical life? Like one of the applications for PCR is for crime detection. Like in this question, Like, suppose you're working in a forensics lab, you have received a DNA sample from a hair left at a crime scene, and you have 3 possible suspects, and you have to use DNA matching to understand who the suspect is. Okay, so you have identified 2 marker alleles. One is of 200 base pair and one is of 300 base pair, and you are going to use these 2 alleles to identify who is the culprit. So this so one contains a single okay, so yeah, in your so like this, you are running a Agrostil electrophoresis. You have one DNA ladder which is used for comparison, like you are using this to compare the size of the fragments which you are going to get. And then you're running, you have in the second column, you have the DNA from the crime scene. So the DNA from the crime scene, it has only one band of 200 base pair length. Next, in the subsequent 3 columns, you're running the DNA of the 3 suspects. So suspect number 1 has 1 fragment of 300 base pair length. Suspect 2 has 2 fragments of 300 and 200 base pair length. And suspect 3 has 1 fragment of 200 base pair length. So we can see that the DNA from the crime scene, it has only 1 fragment of 200 base pair, and suspect 3 also has only 1 fragment or 200 base pair. So their DNA sequence is becoming exactly alike. So we can say that the hair from the crime scene, it matches with suspect number 3, because suspect number 2, it has 2 different fragments, so this is not going to match. And suspect number 1, it has one fragment which is of totally different length as that of the one which is we found from the crime scene. So RT-PCR application in testing for COVID-19. So RT-PCR stands for reverse transcriptase PCR. So this is another kind of PCR in which we are generating DNA from RNA. So we know that COVID-19 is an RNA virus. So using this nasal swab, we are isolating the COVID-19 virus from the nose. So now the RNA of the COVID-19 virus, we are getting it, and using the process of reverse transcription, we are generating a double-stranded DNA from the COVID-19 RNA. Now, after generating the double-stranded DNA, we are again using the PCR. We are using a primer. We are using DNA polymerase to generate multiple copies of this COVID-19 DNA, and then this process is called as the RT-PCR amplification. So after generating multiple copies, we're using a dye to tag this. So this dye, what is going to do, if this is indeed the DNA of the COVID-19 virus, the dye is going to bind to this DNA and is going to give some kind of coloring result. So in this case, like if the coloring result comes out as positive, that means the person is COVID-19 positive. Now, if this virus, like suppose we have not isolated the COVID-19 virus from the nose, we have isolated something else. Suppose this entire thing is not of COVID-19, it's of some other bacteria or a virus. Then this dye is not going to come and attach to this DNA. So then the coloring results will be negative, and we can say that the person is COVID-19 negative. So this is another question: how many DNA molecules will you get at the end of 18 cycles of PCR? So with each cycle of PCR, the number of DNA molecules doubles that of the number in the previous cycle. So the formula, this is given as 2 to the power n, where n is the number of DNA molecules, where the formula is 2 to the power n, where n is the number of cycles of PCR which have taken place. So the question is number which we'll get at the end of 18 cycles. So the number at the end of 18 cycles will be 2 to the power 18, which comes out to be this number. So how to use retroviral vector for gene therapy? So retrovirus means the HIV virus. So the process of using the retroviral vector is that we are inserting the RNA version of the normal allele into a retrovirus or any other viral vector. So retrovirus means the HIV virus. It's an exclusively RNA containing virus. So our DNA, which we convert it into the RNA form, we insert this into the viral RNA. Now this virus, this modified HIV virus, we are inserting it into the stem cells. Suppose we are inserting here into the bone marrow cells, which have been removed from the patient and cultured. We are inserting this modified entire viral vector into this bone marrow. This viral vector is coming and infecting the bone marrow cells or the stem cells here, and they are inserting their RNA into this into our stem cells. Now our stem cells, they are going to start replicating and they will start expressing this RNA which the virus has inserted. Now where this virus, it has inserted our clone gene itself into our stem cell, and in this way we are inserting our gene of interest directly into our body. So we are at the end. So if there are any questions, please ask. Adiksha, are there any questions in the chat box?
No. No questions. Guys, if you have any query, you can ask it. Yes,
Explain me what is telomere. Telomere. Telomere, I think.
telomere.
Telomere.
Okay, so telomere is the end part of the chromosome. It requires special type of replication. So telomeres and are not replicated normally as the whole of the gene, the chromatin is replicated. So we can see that they are present at the end of the chromosome. So the main function of the telomere is that it prevents the chromosome to chromosome sticking. Like there are many chromosomes present in a cell. So to maintain the integrity of the chromosome and to prevent it from sticking to another chromosome, telomeres are present at the end of the chromosome. They act as a cap here. So I hope, is it clear? Akshay, it is clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, like we are
Actually, I
supposed to
have a
make an
doubt.
announcement that today's tutorial will be included in the next graded quiz.
Yeah, I have mentioned that in the chat.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes.
I,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a doubt. You show an example like using a table. I forgot the name. And you showed another example. What was there in the table like BAM H1, Eco R1, that thing in a table you show. Can
This one?
please? No,
So
other one.
the question, the BAM H1 Core1 and NCO restriction.
This one.
This one.
The previous page, previous slide. Yeah, this one. Here in Y plus is in how come this 600 came? Because in Y plus is it there is only 260, and when we reduce 260 from 1000, it's supposed to be 740, right?
Actually, it's Y plus C, so Y plus Z. So you can see that
Yeah, when
this.
you're doing y plus z, like just count the bases here: 10 plus 20 plus 110 plus 260. This part is coming out to be 400, and this part, that means this part is going to come to be 600 because the total length of this is 1000.
What is M1 and M2? Here you mentioned.
What is?
M1, in between the X and Y, there is an M1, and in between the X and Z, there is an M2.
Yeah, this M1. Actually, it may be the multiple cloning site that is the part of the plasmid, but this is not concerned. We are not concerned here with this M1 and M2. So we are mainly focusing on X and Y, the restriction digestion sites. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I have a doubt. Like there are two Ys, and how to know which from which Y we have to take the cut? We have to make the cut because there are two Ys.
So if there are two Y, it will make the cut on both the Ys. So it is possible that a restriction enzyme can have two sites, or may have multiple sites within the same plasmid. So here you can see that this is Y plus Z. So the cut is will be made at both these points, these two y. So when the cut will be made at this 2y, the 140 base pair fragment will be produced. Here you can see the 140 base pair, and the fragment will be y2z, that is 260 base pair fragment, and there you can see the 260 base pair fragment. Then rest of the fragment is of 600 base pair, the one from z to the y on the left side. So the 600 base pair fragment is present. Is it clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Written x y plus z, it is written 140 kilo.
Yeah.
Last number. So
Yes. So actually, can you say it again? We couldn't hear you.
In the y plus z,
Hmm.
you have written that 140.
Yes. So in y plus z, the cut will be at this 2y. So if you calculate the base pair size, the fragment size between these two y, it will be 110 plus 20 plus 10. It will be 140. So the cut will be made at both these y's. Okay.
So in this case, we don't have to measure from y to z, from y
No.
to y.
Actually, the y plus z means that wherever y is present, it will make a cut, and wherever z is present, it will make a cut there. So here three sides are present, 2y and z. So we will get three fragments accordingly. One fragment between two y's, that is 140 base pair. Another fragment between y and z, that is 260 base pair. Then the third fragment between z and the y, that is 600 base pair. Did you get it?
Yes, I got it.
Okay.
So x plus y means we have to cut every x and every y, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
You can try this, and if you get any doubt, please let us know. Once you get the trick, they are simple and they are not so much complicated. So, is there any other doubt? I hope that everything is clear because this tutorial session will be going to be there in your quiz.
Okay, then I guess we can end. Will these type of questions be asked in the quiz?
Yeah, these type of questions can be asked. But the difficulty level, I'm not sure. Let us confirm with the head TAs.
Okay,
So if there are no doubts, yeah. So
I guess we can end the meeting then.
yeah, we can end.
You have to download the attendance.
Yeah, I have downloaded it.
All right. Okay, goodbye everyone. Today's class went a bit long. Sorry for that.
Yeah.
Okay.